Now, it's no secret that I'm a big fan of classic Star Trek, especially the movies with the original cast. For me, films like Wrath of Khan and Undiscovered Country represent the very best that the franchise has to offer. Shit man, even the motion picture isn't too bad if you're drunk or high, or both. But there's one movie that even the most hardcore Trek fans struggle to defend, and that most people, including Paramount, would probably rather forget. Star Trek V: The Final Frontier is a muddled, meandering disaster with a shoddy script, special effects that generate more laughs than the actual goofy attempts at comedy, and a story that tries and fails to grapple with heavy ideas that are totally incompatible with Star Trek. The Final Frontier was a critical and commercial flop that ended Star Trek's winning streak and almost sank the entire franchise in the process. But, as always, the box office tallies and critical reviews are only half the story. When you understand all the problems, struggles and conflicts that went on behind the scenes of this movie, you begin to realise why the end product was such a fucking disaster. And, as always, the drinker's here to point and laugh at it. So join me for another episode of Production Hell. The seeds of Final Frontier's downfall were actually sown way back in the 1960s, when the original series was still going. To prevent favouritism and jealousy between the show's two main stars, William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy negotiated what they called a favoured nations clause in their contracts, which basically meant that what one actor got, so did the other. If Shatner got a pay raise, for example, then so did Nimoy. Great, but what the fuck does a 20-year-old agreement have to do with The Final Frontier? Well, Leonard Nimoy had directed the previous two movies, and done a pretty good job as it happens. Meanwhile, Shatner was embroiled in a pay dispute with Paramount, and one of the incentives that they offered to bring him back in was to let him direct the next movie. Needless to say, Shatner jumped at the chance, and all was well. The only problem was that nobody knew what the fuck the movie should be about. The three-film arc that had kept the franchise going since 1982 had ended with The Voyage Home, and now they basically had a blank slate with their new movie and no idea what to put on it. Flicking through TV late one night, Shatner happened to end up on a televangelist channel and was immediately enthralled by it. The idea of a charismatic leader who could sway people to his cause and convince them to do almost anything soon formed the backbone of his new antagonist. His initial concept would easily have been the most expensive and ambitious Star Trek movie ever. An epic galaxy-spanning adventure about a fanatical religious leader taking over the Enterprise, brainwashing the crew, and using the ship to travel to a distant planet in search of God. It would have had angels, demons, paradise planets, and fiery destructive hellscapes, and an all-powerful entity claiming to be God, only to get unmasked as Satan himself. And of course, only James T. Kirk could stop him. This idea was apparently good enough to get the movie greenlit by Paramount, but what he really needed now was a writer and producer. Harve Bennett had successfully produced the last 3 Star Trek movies, but by now he was burned out and reluctant to come back. Only when Shatner personally travelled to his home and spent hours talking with him did he manage to win the guy over. But even then, Bennett objected to the heavy religious overtones of Shatner's movie. So did Gene Roddenberry, who had apparently wanted to explore similar ideas with the motion picture 10 years earlier, only to get shit-canned by Paramount and was still bitter about it. Leonard Nimoy and DeForest Kelley weren't exactly thrilled either, feeling like their characters were being deliberately shit on to make Kirk look more heroic. The rest of the cast also started causing problems when they realised that most of them had been relegated to glorified extras, or used as the butt of cheap jokes that were totally out of step with the rest of the film.
I know this ship like the back of my hand.
Even Paramount themselves were unwilling to sign off such a massive and ambitious production, forcing Shatner to drop many of his special effects shots and scale back the rest of the story to make it more cost effective. The result was a fragmented, compromised screenplay that didn't really satisfy anyone, but by this point it was all they had. Star Trek was losing its momentum after 2 years without any movies, so the only answer was to go straight into production in 1988 and just hope they could figure out the script issues along the way. Unfortunately, things didn't get much better once production started in October. A Hollywood truck driver strike meant the production had to use non-union workers, and when one of their camera trucks mysteriously exploded outside the studio, they were forced to head out to location under cover of darkness with a fucking police escort to protect them. Not exactly a great start. The first major scene they filmed had Shatner free climbing an enormous vertical cliff in Yosemite National Park, which was actually just a fiberglass mock-up in a nearby parking lot. It seemed like a great idea at the time. Unfortunately, nobody noticed the pine tree in the background that totally ruined the illusion until they'd wrapped, forcing them to go back and reshoot the whole thing again. Filming in the Mojave Desert wasn't any better. Temperatures quickly soared to over 110 degrees, causing cast and crew members to pass out from dehydration. Crew buses failed to show up, leaving Shatner and the others stranded in the middle of nowhere for hours on end. At one point, it all became too much for Shatner, who allegedly snapped under the extreme conditions and started screaming at his production managers. The worst was yet to come though. Shatner's original idea for the finale of the movie would have seen a tropical paradise planet transformed into a fiery hellscape, with CGI demons and monsters coming after him, Spock and McCoy. Clearly this would have been expensive as fuck to film, so an increasingly nervous Paramount pulled the plug on the idea. The animated demons were replaced with rock monsters that would rise up out of the ground to attack the heroes, and it would all be done with practical effects to save money. In this case, a prosthetic suit designed to breathe fire and emit smoke like it was made out of lava. Shatner wanted 6 of the things, Paramount only gave him 1. And pretty soon, it became clear that the rock monster wasn't everything they'd hoped for. The flamethrower didn't work, and the smoke got blown away by the wind, so that all you were left with was a man waddling around in a big fake rubber suit. Needless to say, they soon abandoned the idea, leaving Shatner with no option but to shoot a bunch of generic footage and just hope that they could cobble something together in post-production. With the location shoots finally wrapped, the production moved into sound stages for the interior stuff, and miraculously, it actually went pretty smoothly. Damn, maybe this film wasn't too bad after all. I mean, shooting on location is always a pain in the arse, so maybe it was going to be plain sailing from now on.
You serious?
Unfortunately, the problems only got worse when it came to post-production. See, Star Trek movies up to this point had used ILM for all their special effects work, and to be fair, they'd been worth every penny. Most of them still hold up pretty well even today. Unfortunately, by the late 80s, movies were getting more and more ambitious, and ILM were already committed to other projects, which meant that Paramount needed a cheaper alternative. The company they finally settled on was headed up by Brad Ferrin, and they were given 3 months to complete all the required effects work, about half as much time as they actually needed. The end result, and there's no way of sugarcoating this really, is that the movie ended up looking like ass. All the space combat scenes look like they came out of the original series from the 1960s, and the shots of the Great Barrier or the God Entity are basically just a bunch of swirling clouds awkwardly composited into the action. It's cheap and nasty, and a massive step backwards from the previous movies, but like so many aspects of this film, it was the best they could do with the time and budget available. All of these different elements ultimately combined together to create a film that was kind of an uneven, confused mess, too far removed from traditional Star Trek to appeal to core fans, but too niche and high-minded to capture a wider audience. The movie was duly panned by critics and fans alike, and despite a strong opening weekend, it quickly tailed off at the box office to become one of the major disappointments of 1989. The fallout from The Final Frontier actually put the future of Star Trek at risk for a while, and Paramount only agreed to make The Undiscovered Country on a considerably reduced budget to give the original crew a proper farewell. And it's a shame really, because I think there's some great individual elements to this film, whether it's a nighttime assault on a desert outpost, or watching a devastated McCoy euthanize his terminally ill father, or an adventure that takes you from a campfire at Yosemite to a desolate planet on the other side of the galaxy. The Final Frontier is a movie packed full of ideas and ambition. It's a film that genuinely strives to do something big and profound, and I'll give Shatner credit for really delving into the dynamic between the three lead characters, giving them all a chance to shine and play off each other. The problem is that none of these grand ideas really gel into a satisfying whole. Partly through a compromised script, partly through endless budget reductions, and partly because it was a flawed idea to begin with. It should have been obvious to everyone involved that the central story about the search for God was never going to have a satisfying conclusion. Honestly though, part of me kinda wishes we'd gotten to see Shatner's original epic adventure in all its glory, with all the big extravagant special effects and grand religious overtones laid out for all the world to see. Yeah, it probably would have been an even bigger disaster than what we got, but damn, at least it would have been fun to watch. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.